Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Rush Hour podcast. I'm so excited today to talk to Rob from Vanderpump Robs. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm so thrilled to be here. This has been, you know what? It's a dream come true. We'll just put it out there, Dave.
For both of us, it really is. I mean, we're kind of like living this parallel universe covering the hot gossip from the world we live in. I want to start by introducing you to my audience with how did you get involved covering Vanderpump, and where has that taken the channel from? Did you just start solely in the Vanderpump niche, or how did it all begin?
I've worked in podcasting as a producer since like 2014, 2015. I took the leap and met a writer who wanted to start a podcast. And then I ended up working at SiriusXM in a producer position. I don't work there anymore. And then in around 2018, I was like, you know what? I want to host something. And I've really got addicted to season 6 of Vanderpump Rules. And I just binged everything. And I was working with these guys on a Star Trek podcast as their producer, The Greatest Generation, shout out, very fun show. And they were like, you should call it Vanderpump Robs because your last name is Schulte. Like the simplest but silliest little thing. And I was like, yeah, there's no harm here. There's no risk involved. I'll just recap some old episodes. I don't even know if anyone wants it. And then it turns out people did want it, and they wanted me to not recap old episodes. They wanted me to recap new episodes and not waste any time. So I've been having a lot of fun with it.
Isn't it funny how you kind of can dive into a niche and think that no one's going to tune in? You do all these things your whole life, and it's a very crowded market commentary. And then sometimes you just have the right angle, or maybe you have a voice that wasn't being heard. So what was, do you think you were able to dive in as a podcaster because you saw like logistically how it could be done from the producer end? Like, had you ever had any other itches before then, or just one of those all right, I know how to do this?
Yeah, I had started a couple of shows where, I'll talk about horror movies with this friend or other TV shows with another friend. And they kind of just, I don't want to say I'm a control freak, even though I kind of am, but it was hard for me to really take any of those shows off the ground because it was like a lot of planning and not a lot of follow through. But this was something I could do on my own. And I was like, all right, from soup to nuts, I know how to make the show I want to make, and I can have fun doing it. And not to say anything bad about those other shows. I still have a lot of fun with say Pumpkin Spice Podcast with my buddy, but we don't grow. We just sit in a room and have fun talking about horror movies. But with Vanderpump Robs, it was I actually have a take that I care about, and I have fun, and I feel invested in this show. I'm going to make it my own. And over the years, I've had guest co-hosts. I've had just special guests on the show. It's taken a totally different form than I ever could have planned for. And I think from coming from a producer world, the thing that helped there was knowing that I didn't have to create rules for myself that then I was afraid to break. And I say this to anyone I've ever helped get a podcast off the ground. Look, you can say you want to do X, Y, and Z for the show, but one day it's going to be really difficult to hit one of those markers, and you shouldn't feel beholden to that because your show has evolved. Just because you say you're going to do one thing at one point in time doesn't mean that you made up the rule. You can break the rule, and I think that's kind of the motto I've tried to follow myself as I've grown from just covering Vanderpump to doing Southern Charm and Summer House and Vanderpump Villa for God knows what reason, and anything else I feel like covering.
I have that same feeling where the barometer of what is good content is whatever makes you interested, because people are watching for your take. Now, sometimes you don't want to do a hard left turn into something completely different. You have to ease the audience into the whatever niche you're moving. But my audience was Bachelor Nation, and then it's moved to more pop culture. But Bachelor Nation had that same parasocial connection where we all know who we're talking about. If you talk about La La Kent, your audience knows. So there's this water cooler element to it that you might not get if you're just I don't know, doing a show like my old show was like dating in relationships. It was like so
Sure.
vague and so saturated. But with this, there's like an unending thirst for comments. So when I first made my YouTube video on The Bachelor years ago, I couldn't believe that several folks found it because you didn't make content back in the day for people to find it. It was
Yeah.
like, so you're seeing this Vanderpump crowd. Now, what was the pre-Scandoval versus post-Scandoval? Has the show changed because of this internationally known dramatic storyline?
Yeah, it has. And it's a struggle I kind of find within myself too, because look, opinions change, thoughts change. At a certain point, I thought Tom Sandoval was a goofy guy that was kind of fun to watch on TV. I still think that, but it comes with like this added layer, right? But in doing that, it's made me really address how I cover the content, because for a long time I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna like say what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna have a joke here, a joke there. I'm not gonna take it too serious. But then after enduring excuse me, after enduring Scandoval, I recognized how much people were invested, and that seems really quaint now, like looking back on it. But at the time you were kind of like, well, is anyone gonna give a shit about what I have to say about this? I don't know. And then the moment you say one phrase like, well, let me just put myself in Raquel's shoes for a moment. Like, I guess I could see where this would happen if you're dating. And then you get a long DM from a handful of people, and you're like, okay, some people are listening, and they may not be listening to me necessarily for a nuanced take. They want some confirmation bias here. And it's a delicate walk. It hasn't really changed how I approach the shows, but it does make me more active in understanding that not just fans will be listening to the podcast.
That's so interesting. I couldn't relate more. You'll be clipped out of context and then shared with an audience that might not know your nuance or know years of support and things like that. I was the same way because, and to be quite honest, I didn't really understand what Vanderpump was. It was a word that I knew, but didn't really. I was like, it's just one of those show. You hear Summer House, and you're like, I know it, but I don't know it. So I was one of those people that found the show through that. And yeah, I look at Tom Sandoval as a guy who has been rewarded for about a decade for debauchery. Same thing with all of these other cast members.
Sure.
And we see this with celebrity culture, right? The second someone gets fame, they kind of stop evolving because at that point, they no longer need the tools that they needed in society to get where they are. And so I look at it from a place of pity. And it doesn't mean I don't look at his acts who he cheated on and feel like it's like you said, it's just nuance. Like you can feel bad for someone for going through hell and back, but know that they also were part of a show that caused it. But at the same time, you look at someone like Andy Cohen and go, isn't he the one that everyone should be like, this is the guy pulling the strings on this madness? So people aren't ready to have that conversation in the heat of the moment, it seems.
Yeah. And I think something I really learned from Scandoval was that it brought, there's this bigger thing that I have trouble articulating a lot of the times, and I've got a project that I can't announce quite yet, but I'll come back when I can announce it. But it's this idea that we all went into lockdown during the prime of the pandemic, right? During the prime of COVID, we're in lockdown for a year, and people are binging their favorite reality shows. A lot of that ends up being Bravo and Vanderpump Rules, and they're developing parasocial relationships unintentionally. And then once we're out of it, we've got the COVID season, which is like, oh, well, this kind of sucks. We're kind of like still feeling like we're in lockdown while watching our shows. And then we get season 10 and Scandoval breaks. And I think it kind of, the unnuanced, unpolite way to say is it kind of broke a fan base's brain, right? Like, and so all of these like feelings and emotions and theories they had on characters kind of went out the window, or were just a rug pull for them. And I think it made a lot of viewers look at the people that have either cheated on them or had done them wrong in their life, or any sort of like transference that could have happened with them. And that heightened every single moment. So it brought out like the magnifying glasses and the most intense fandoms. And it also raised the profile on a lot of amateur content creators to where I think for a long time it was a rising tide situation. But now we're, a few years later, and the people who, I'm not going to say it affected them less, but the people who were kind of like, wow, what a moment, are kind of like, okay, it's behind us now. But some people are still riding this Scandoval wave because it gave them a little bit of something to latch onto on Instagram or a podcast or whatever. And I think you're starting to see now that the juice ain't worth the squeeze, and that some of these people were maybe not made to create things if their only thing they could latch onto was Scandoval, right? Because people are going to not care in a while, right?
I love this type of conversation because you're talking about people whose equity, like what they bring to the table, was the scandal and not their commentary. Like you and I, like we could probably go give me any story in the news and we could probably do an hour on it. But you're right. There's a lot of people that once that story burns off, they're kind of they're going trying to get back to that high school high that they used to have, and it's like, all right, we got to all move on, and it's like, and that's kind of, in my opinion, how interesting for Vanderpump producers to say, you know what, we need a whole new cast. Can you walk me through your opinion on not canceling the show, taking the same formula, but just wiping the slate clean?
Honestly, I think it's for the best. I'm not going to put out there that I think it's going to succeed or anything like this, but when you look at the shows that were primarily starring elder millennials and that generation of people, which I am a part of, those shows have run their course. I talk about it all the time on my podcast that like once you hit like season 9, season 10 of a Bravo show, and I'm excluding Housewives here because I think that's its own universe, people start self-producing, they start getting brand deals way more. They just know that it's kind of a machine at that point. And quite frankly, you're not going to get a Scandoval every single show or every single season. And even if you could say producers are trying to make that sort of happen in Summer House or Southern Charm or whatever, but realistically, it's that people are just clocking in at this point. And if there's not a real storyline, producers will get lazy, editors will get lazy, not lazy, but like they just know what they're doing. So a new cast for Vanderpump Rules is going to work, I think, as long as it's not rinse and repeat, if it's not people just clocking in. So my hope is that not only is it a new cast, but it's a new production team. Look, I know Baskin and some of the EPs on the show are never going to leave, but I hope that like all behind the scenes and all in front of the camera are going to be new, because that's what's going to get us the show that we love, because it's a formula that works. We just kind of needed to put it in a blender.
When I look at how these shows are cast and run, I relate it. I'm a New England Patriots fan, and I relate it back to Bill Belichick. So, greatest coach of all time. He'll look at a player that might not be a running back, might not be a wide receiver, doesn't really fit as a tight end, and he'll say, "That's a great athlete. I'll find out what they need to do to succeed." And he takes a wide receiver and makes them a quarterback. He does all. He's very shifty to see the gold where it is. So it'll be important for the show not to try to find a Tom Sandoval, but just know when they see something, this is it. And I think what happened, you talk a lot about sort of the fallback of like parasocial relationships and the audience feedback. I think what happened during the pandemic is, and again, the pandemic also came with a lot of different social justice issues, is that cast members on The Bachelor were afraid to share their opinion because there were probably toxic opinions and there was a lot of pushback, and it created really, really bad TV. And my response to the audience is, if you're going to try to cancel everybody for every opinion they have, you're no longer going to have a show. And I think Vanderpump, if they have a new cast with young people that aren't media savvy. They might go in there and just give you that young 20 something bonehead opinion, which audiences will like, even if it's problematic. At least you're going to get their authenticity.
Absolutely. And I think that there's this world with a new cast where they've hopefully seen a handful of Vanderpump Rules episodes and know that they might overcorrect in a way that could be great on television too. And then they could also not necessarily learn from the mistakes, but realize like, well, we can't just hash out the same argument over and over again. I don't think they're going to self-produce themselves in that way. I think they are going to be young enough and quite frankly naive enough to know that, or to not know that, what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, and like if we're gonna watch like a show that's like essentially kind of like a Truman Show thing in a way where they're in their own little like globe, if we're gonna watch that, I think as audiences we need to have a little bit of space to let them make the mistakes that they're gonna make, and that way it's like, all right, you'll get the apology at the reunion. I
Yeah.
do like the fact that they do have these like end of episode recaps where they try to be more reasonable based on whatever fires they lit under each other's ass. But Bravo does such a good job of finding these characters that are in that sweet spot where they're all looking to get laid. They're pretty good looking. They have a really good formula. And when I actually got into Bravo because of Scandoval, I realized how much better programming it is than The Bachelor, which is kind of like this fantasy festival. I mean, The Bachelor is like on its life support, ready to be canceled because it can't compete with these other shows. So I've been a big fan of Below Deck, but I haven't really dabbled into Real Housewives or Summer House, and I'll tell you why. There's so many versions of these shows that it's like multi-choice syndrome where I don't even know where to start. So sell me on Summer House. Like, what do I need to be watching for?
Well, first of all, I totally get the analysis paralysis because that's me with Housewives, right? I totally get that. And I totally agree with you on Bachelor. One of my favorite podcasts is The Bachelor PhD, where it's a bunch of academics talking about it. And they're like, the show can't get out of the 50s. What is going on? But in terms of like Summer House and Southern Charm and some other Bravo shows, well, I'll start with Summer House. Summer House is perfect because there's no guarantee throughout any season that any character will ever return. And it's just friends coming from New York to have a share house in the Hamptons for the weekend. And weekend to weekend, given the cast on any season, one person might be like, oh, I got to go to my family's this weekend. Or, so the dynamic's always going to be a little bit different each season and each time they go to the share house. That being said, there are a handful of people who have been on the show since the very beginning, right? So they're not going to be losing a Kyle Cook or an Amanda or a Carl Radke, right? So that is fun. The other thing about Summer House is I think the stakes are lower. I think it's like, what do you want to do? It's a little bit more real world. It's a little bit more just like, look at these people. They don't have to have a job in the summer house. They can come out, they can plan parties, they can get drunk, they can start fights, they can, party at the house, make macaroni and cheese, whatever it is. They're just kind of like goofballs who fuck up, and we get to watch that because there's not a, relative to other shows, there's not a steady cam in the room. It's like stationary cameras. Of course, there are camera operators that happen at like parties and stuff, but you do get a lot of like stationary cameras too. So it'll like cut to a different room when someone's talking about someone, seeing if they can overhear it. I think Summer House has that going for it. To talk about Charleston though, I think Southern Charm is like has jumped the shark at this point, especially after this recent season. I call it FaceTime the season. Southern Charm has like so many episodes where people who live blocks away from each other filmed FaceTiming one another. That's not why I'm watching the show, right? Like it needs a shot in the arm of something. But Southern Hospitality, the Southern Charm spinoff, a lot of people say it's like it gives you that vintage Vanderpump. The only thing that it is in old Vanderpump is that it's a group of young people working at a nightclub. Everything else is such a change in pace in excitement, in friendship dynamics that are happening in Charleston with people who don't necessarily come from old money either. So they do have, your first time apartment. You do have the struggling with tips. You do have the my boyfriend, my girlfriend cheated on me. You do have the workplace drama. And this third season that just ended, I've said it time and time again. It's my favorite show on Bravo right now. I think that Southern Hospitality has found its footing after a couple of awkward seasons, but
See,
still good.
you're selling it to me. I would have had no idea because I get my vision gets blurred looking at all of the options. But there's no surprise to me that post pandemic these shows are so big because they kind of replicate feeling like you're part of a community, which is not easy
Absolutely.
to do. And we remember you brought up Real World. I mean, we're chasing that high, and I think of Jersey Shore and these communities that whenever Jersey Shore has like a reunion, I'll find myself binge watching 6 hours of it just to see what situations. It's like, why do we care? But it's like it's a part. It's like a chapter in our life. Now, I like this hypothetical. I wanted to run by you. If you're stuck in a bunker, what show are you watching? And and I'm talking like 10 years in a bunker. So do you go on longevity, like a show that's got a bunch of seasons, or like what are you taking with you?
Wow. And
give me a Bravo answer, and then I'll open it up to non-Bravo.
okay. If I'm taking a Bravo, it might actually be the only Housewives show I've watched from the beginning because it's just it's close to my heart, and that's Real Housewives of New York. I started watching it when I moved to New York. I no longer live in New York, but when I did, I was like, maybe this will show me how the city works and areas of the city. I don't know, but it like has such longevity, and I wouldn't say Vanderpump because I've watched it all so many times, like for the show. For the podcast. And I think Real Housewives of New York is the thing that I was just like one and done. Like, okay, I'm binging this. I don't have any need to go back to it. But if I'm in a bunker, the original series has, 13 seasons or whatever. Like I that I've only seen one time through. So that would have to be the Bravo show for me. For non-Bravo show, this could change next week. And this is a very simple answer, I think. But it might have to be Sopranos. It might have to be. I mean, it's just a great scripted show. And I think if I'm going to balance out a reality show, I have to have it with a really great scripted show. And
it's a tough question, right?
Yeah.
Because I've had the debate where I go, well, Law and Order's got like 30 seasons. So you want to blow your brains out watching that much Law and Order versus Survivor. That's got a ton of seasons.
I love Survivor, but Survivor doesn't have that like rewatch factor. If I'm going to be stuck in a bunker, I gotta have the
rewatch factor. Well, I'm going to have to just start watching some of these shows because, like I said, I'm well aware that Bachelor, which buttered my bread, is pretty much going away. How do you feel about your sort of podcast and the brand being tied to Vanderpump, and it may or may not succeed? Like a lot's riding on this next season.
Well, I've been doing. It's terrifying, quite frankly, but I think I've done a good job of turning the title of the show Vanderpump Robs to just like tongue in cheek sort of thing, and knowing that I will cover whatever reality show I feel like covering. But of course, if there's a Vanderpump show, I'll be covering that. And, I go out on a risk from time to time on my Patreon, and like, I'll do a month where I just cover like sleazy Hollywood trilogies, right? And just make it feel like it's in the universe, but not quite. So people know they can go there if they want takes on like the Angel movie series or something. It's something that I have fun with, and I really try not to stress too much about it because at the end of the day, it's in the audience hands. I just have fun making it.
Yeah, I agree with you with the idea where you're not going to always be everything every audience wants. So it's like we're kind of like one man shops, and you have to cover what's interesting to you. I'll move from like one court case to one celebrity story, and then that'll be like the big feeder fish, and then there'll be all the little guppies that go, all the little stories, the wombat girl and the
Mhm.
whatever, astronauts are stuck in space. Like there'll be like those little things. And then here's the core thing we're talking about. But I think it's smart to have the Vanderpump sort of like that's where you come from. And I think Vanderpump could have another 10 seasons if this cast is good. We don't
I
know,
think so
right?
too. Yeah, I think they could. And Lisa's got the second season of Vanderpump Villa coming out, and Stassi's on there, and so there's always going to be something if I have to pull it back to the Lisa centric universe. But otherwise, look, there could be a time where I decide I'm just going to start covering Love on the Spectrum or something, and that's just what I want to do, and people can come over or not. Probably wouldn't be for a very long time, but I'm building a home for the
Yeah.
reality TV I like to watch.
And it's like Vanderpump, like a show based on the drama for people that work at a restaurant is huge. I mean, like my whole town is like a tourist industry, and the restaurant industry is hilarious.
Yeah.
The shenanigans that come around with it. So I have
Oh
no
yeah.
doubt that there'll be some interesting moments. Are you watching The Valley, which is like sort of graduated Vanderpump show as they move
Yeah,
across the
I
hill?
covered all of season 1 on the Patreon, but I think I'm going to be putting the season 2 in the public. I'll tell you though, I don't have high hopes for it.
Really?
I think Jax is amazing television, even though he's not an amazing human being. I think Kristen Doty is born for reality TV. It is in her DNA. I think that the Valley had a real trouble in the first season because Kristen was ostracized by episode 3. So we got like scenes of her walking her dog with her boyfriend while everyone went off to a party. And it's like, well, that's not what I'm tuning in to this show for. And I'm hoping that these sins are not continued into season 2. I also think they've hyped season 2 a bit much for us with the Jackson Brittany divorce and Jax's addiction. And like, I get a little grossed out when, for example, Jax is like, look, I'm 83 days sober and I'm going to do an interview. And I'm a sober person, just so we're on the same page here. I'm 83 days sober and I've made this announcement right as we've started like
Mm.
promoting the new season. That something about that feel, my antenna goes up a little bit, and I feel like maybe that's happening because the timing of that is happening because the season is not as good as we're expecting it to be.
Yeah, I had the same, as an outsider when I saw that interview, and he's like, and it'll be all, you'll see it. You'll see me getting my papers served on the upcoming season.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh boy, here we go. But I can't tune away from it. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much for joining me today. And where can people find you across the board?
Yeah, Vanderpump Robs on Instagram, TikTok, and all of those things. Actually, I think TikTok's like Robs, but you Google it, you'll find it, folks. The Patreon is patreon.com/Vanderpump Robs. That's where all of the ad-free and bonus stuff is. We all know how that works. But the podcast is Vanderpump Robs, wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, we appreciate having you. Come back anytime.
Yeah, Dave, and you're welcome on my show whenever you want as well. This has been great. I really appreciate you having me.
Of course, take care.